Freddie Mercury's cat Meow inspired Queen's biggest hit. Bandmates, shocked by genius. London, late 1970s. In the quiet neighborhood of Kensington, behind high brick walls, shielding a mansion from the prying eyes of paparazzi, a new day begins. Inside the house, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and old books, Freddie Mercury wakes not to an alarm clock, but to the soft yet insistent patter of paws on the wooden floor. 7 cats, his loyal companions, have long been waiting for their owner to open his eyes. They know that once Freddie rises, their day will begin, a day filled with food, play, affection, and most importantly, joint creativity. Freddie had always loved animals. Even as a child growing up in Zanzibar, he played with stray cats wandering the dusty streets of the city. His family kept several cats, and young Farrak, as he was then called, spent hours watching their graceful movements, mysterious gazes, and independent natures. When he moved to England and later became a star, cats remained his constant companions. For Freddie, they were more than just pets. They were part of his world, a source of peace, and as he often joked, his personal muses. In the Kensington house lived 7 cats, each with its own personality and name reflecting its unique traits. There was Murda, the black cat with green eyes, whom Freddie adored, seemingly possessing an almost mystical wisdom. She always sat beside him when he worked, and, as Freddie claimed, she was the one who suggested his best ideas. There was Opera, a ginger cat with a loud voice who, according to Freddie, sang in harmony with his vocal exercises. There was Spectra, a snowy white cat whose movements resembled ballet, often inspiring Freddie's stage choreography. And there were others, Rocky, Bismuth, Quincy, and Azure, each with their own story and role in the life of the king of rock and roll. But among all the cats, Murda held a special place. She was named after Murda Lavrin, the famous opera singer whose name Freddie spoke with reverence. He often said that Murda wasn't just a cat, but his spiritual mentor. She came into his life during one of his most challenging creative crises, when he couldn't write a single line for a new album. One day, while walking around the neighborhood, Freddie noticed a small black cat sitting on a fence. She looked at him as if she knew what he was searching for. He took her home, and from that moment, they became inseparable. Cats were an integral part of Freddie's daily life. Every morning, as soon as he descended to the kitchen, they were already waiting by their bowls, demanding breakfast. Dressed in a bright robe embroidered with golden musical notes, Freddie laughed as he watched their impatient jumps. All right, he would say, pouring food into their bowls. But today we have important work. We need to write something grand. The cats seemed to understand him. They sat in a circle, watching as he brewed tea and pulled out his notebook. But their role went beyond mere observation. For Freddie, they were active participants in his creative process. He often joked that without them, Queen would never have created their most famous hits. They don't just sit nearby. He once said in an interview, "They dictate lyrics to me. Sometimes I hear their voices, and they sound like the most beautiful melodies." Of course, colleagues and friends thought this was a joke, but those who knew Freddie well noticed that his connection with the cats was more than just a quirk. Each day began the same way. After breakfast, Freddie headed to his studio, a small room filled with pianos, guitars, and stacks of scribbled papers. The cats followed him like a shadow. Myrna always took the most prominent spot, on the piano lid, where she could observe every move he made. The others settled around, some on the windowsill, some on stacks of paper, some curling up at his feet. Freddie sat down at the piano, and the magic began. He played chords, hummed melodies, jotted down ideas. Sometimes he got stuck, unsure how to continue. At those moments, he would look at the cats as if seeking a hint. And strangely enough, they'd always responded. Myrna, for instance, might suddenly stand up and walk across the keys, creating a random sequence of notes. Freddie would freeze, listening, then repeat those notes, incorporating them into his composition. "See," he would say, turning to an imaginary interlocutor. "She knows what's needed." His working method seemed odd even to those close to him. Queen's producers often joked that the album credits should read, "Lyrics written by Freddie Mercury and his cats." But Freddie didn't object. On the contrary, he was proud of this connection. For him, the cats weren't just animals. They were part of his creative soul, his personal muse inspiring him to great deeds. The story of how the cats helped Freddie write lyrics became legendary among his circle. Once, during the recording of the Game album, guitarist Brian May caught Freddie in the studio surrounded by cats. "You're serious?" Brian asked, watching Freddie record sounds Murda was making. "You're going to use this in a song?" Freddie smiled. "Of course," he replied. "It's genius. Listen to how she meows. That's the perfect rhythm for the chorus." Thus began the era when cats became an inseparable part of Queen's creativity. Though most people considered it a joke, those who knew Freddie understood. For him, it was serious. The cats were his inspiration, his support, his music. And perhaps it was thanks to them that Queen created the songs that still resonate in the hearts of millions worldwide. Murda wasn't just a cat. For Freddie, she was something more, his silent advisor, his secret co-author, his connection to a world he couldn't express in words. Her arrival in his life coincided with a period when he was experiencing one of his most difficult creative crises. After the success of A Night at the Opera and the legendary Bohemian Rhapsody, pressure on the band increased. Fans awaited a new masterpiece, and Freddie felt his inspiration drying up. He sat at the piano for hours, trying chords, but words eluded him like smoke. One day, during such a time, tired and frustrated, he went outside for fresh air and saw her. A small black cat sat on a fence, as if waiting for him. Her eyes, green and piercing, looked at him as if they knew what he was searching for. Freddie approached, and the cat, unafraid, jumped down to his feet. He picked her up and felt her warmth seep into him like a calming wave. At that very moment, as if by magic, a melody sounded in his head. He ran home, placed the cat on the piano, and began to play. The lyrics came naturally, as if Murda was dictating them to him. Thus, "Don't Stop Me Now," one of Queen's most energetic and life-affirming songs, was born. From then on, Murda became Freddie's constant companion. She sat beside him in the studio, observing every move, sometimes interrupting his thoughts with a soft meow or a gentle paw touch. Freddie claimed she suggested his best ideas. "She's not just a cat," he told friends. "She understands music. She feels every note, every word." Once, while working on Killer Queen, Freddie got stuck on the line. "She's a killer queen, gunpowder, gelatine." He couldn't find the right continuation. Suddenly, Murda, who had been lying quietly on the table, stood up and walked across the sheet of paper, leaving paw prints in the ink. Freddie looked at the pattern she created, and the phrase instantly came to his mind: "Dynamite with a laser beam." He laughed, realizing the cat had just helped him complete the chorus. "You're a genius, Murda," he whispered, stroking her back. "You're the real queen." But Murda didn't limit herself to leaving prints on paper. She expressed her thoughts in more complex ways. Once, while Freddie worked on Somebody to Love, he struggled to convey the depth of emotion in the lyrics. He tried dozens of variations, but none felt strong enough. Then Murda, as always, came to the rescue. She jumped onto his lap and, looking straight into his eyes, began softly mewing, as if trying to sing with him. Her voice, quiet and melodic, reminded Freddie that it wasn't just about words but about feelings. He closed his eyes, imagining singing from her perspective, and suddenly the lyrics came. "Can anybody find me somebody to love?" Freddie often joked that Murda was his personal critic. If he wrote something she didn't like, she would turn away and leave him alone. But if the song was good, she would sit beside him and purr, as if giving her blessing. "She never lies," he said. "If she approves, the song is ready for recording." His circle gradually got used to this strange dynamic. When Freddie came to rehearsals, he often began with the question, "What does Murda think of this chorus?" Brian May and Roger Taylor teased him, but deep down, they respected his method. They knew Freddie had his own paths to inspiration, and if cats helped him, why not? Once, during the recording of Bicycle Race, Freddie wanted to add an unusual sound to the song. He experimented with various effects for a long time, but nothing fit. Then Murda, as if sensing his difficulty, jumped onto the table and began playing with the tape recorder, scratching it with her claws. Freddie laughed and recorded this sound, adding it to the instrumental. Later, he joked that Murda had come up with the famous scratching effect in that song. But the most amazing thing happened when Freddie wrote lyrics for his most personal songs. Love of My Life, for example, emerged when he sat in the garden watching Murda chase butterflies. Her graceful movements, her focus, her tenderness in that moment, all inspired him to write this poignant ballad. She showed me that love isn't just passion, but a quiet, deep feeling, he later said. I watched her and realized I wanted to convey that in a song. Myrna wasn't just a source of ideas. She helped Freddie find balance between work and rest. When he got too absorbed, she gently reminded him to take a break. She would jump onto his keyboard, preventing him from playing or lie on sheets of lyrics, forcing him to stop working and play with her. She knows when I'm overworked, he said, and she always knows how to bring me back to life. His love for Murda was mutual. The cat seemed to understand how important he was to her and responded with the same devotion. She accompanied him even on trips, traveling in a special basket decorated with golden musical notes. When Freddie gave concerts, she stayed at the hotel, but as soon as he returned, she greeted him at the door, as if rejoicing in every minute spent together. Once, during a U.S. tour, Freddie felt unwell. He lay in a hotel room, trying to cope with a headache, when Murda approached and lay beside him, placing a paw on his hand. Her warmth and purring calmed him, and he fell asleep, feeling she was guarding his sleep. The next day, he went on stage and gave one of the most brilliant concerts of his career. After the performance, he raised the microphone and said, "This victory is for Murda. She saved my life today." For Freddie, Murda wasn't just a cat. She was his muse, his friend, his connection to what he called true music. She reminded him that creativity wasn't just work but play, not just tension but joy. And when he looked into her green eyes, he felt that music wasn't just sounds but a living, breathing entity that needed to be cherished and understood. Over the years, their bond grew stronger. Freddie often said Murda knew him better than anyone else. She sensed his moods, his doubts, his joy. And perhaps that's why his songs were so sincere, because they contained a piece of her soul. Freddie's studio in Kensington was where legends were born. But for those who knew him closely, this room wasn't just a workspace. It was a living organism filled with energy, noise, and of course, cats. The 7 pets didn't just watch the music creation process. They actively participated, turning each session into an unpredictable, chaotic, yet surprisingly productive show. The room, painted dark red, was filled with instruments, a grand piano by the window, guitars hanging on the walls, shelves with tape recorders and microphones. But the most noticeable element was the cats. They'd occupied every available surface. Murda on the piano lid, Opera on the windowsill, Spectra on the sofa back, Rocky on a stack of sheet music, Bismuth on the tape recorder table, Quincy on the cushion at Freddie's feet, and Azure on Freddie himself, wrapping around his neck like a living necklace. Each day began the same way. Freddie entered the studio with a cup of tea, and the cats, as if on cue, took their places. He sat at the piano, and the real show began. Murda, his main co-author, spoke first. She didn't just sit on the piano. She actively participated in creating music. Her soft, precise paws sometimes accidentally touched the keys, creating random chords. But for Freddie, these accidents were inspiration. He froze, tried the notes she played, and added them to his composition. "See," he would say, turning to an imaginary interlocutor. "She knows what's needed. It's not an accident. It's genius." Opera, the ginger cat with a loud voice, was responsible for vocal hints. As soon as Freddie began humming a melody, Opera joined in, making his own sounds in harmony. Sometimes his mewing matched high notes, and Freddie laughed, saying Opera was his second vocalist. Once, while working on Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Freddie got stuck on the chorus. He tried dozens of variations, but nothing fit. Then Opera, as if sensing his difficulty, began loudly mewing, repeating the same melodic phrase. Freddie froze, then recorded this sequence. Thus, the famous chorus was born. "This thing called love, I just can't handle it." Later, he joked that Opera should receive royalties for this song. Spectra, the snow-white cat with graceful movements, inspired Freddie's choreography. When he worked on lyrics, she often walked in front of him, as if dancing. Her fluid movements resembled ballet, and Freddie often paused to watch her. Once, while riding bicycle race, he noticed Spectra playing with the tape recorder ribbon, winding around it like a snake. This inspired him to create the famous floating sound effect in the instrumental. "She showed me how music should move," he later said. "She's a real dancer." Rocky, the most energetic of the cats, was responsible for rhythm. He loved running around the room, tapping his paws on the wooden floor in a fast tempo. Freddie often laughed, watching him. "Rocky, you're like a metronome." Once, during the recording of Another One Bites the Dust, Freddie got stuck on the rhythmic part. He tried many variations, but nothing sounded right. Then Rocky, as if sensing his difficulty, began running around the room, creating a clear, powerful rhythm. Freddie listened and recorded this tempo, adding it to the song. Later, he admitted that Rocky gave him the idea for the famous bass riff. Bismuth, the black and white cat with an unusual coat, was responsible for the technical side. She loved playing with the tape recorder, scratching the tape with her claws or tangling wires. But for Freddie, these weren't disruptions, they were new sounds. Once, while working on Flash Gordon, he noticed Bismuth scratching the tape, creating a distortion effect. He recorded this sound and added it to the instrumental, creating a cosmic adventure atmosphere. "She knows how to make music more interesting," he joked. "It's not a breakdown, it's innovation." Quincy, the calmest of the cats, was responsible for atmosphere. She always lay at Freddie's feet, purring in time with his playing. Her presence calmed him when he felt stressed. Once, while recording Love of My Life, Freddie experienced a creative crisis. He couldn't find the right words for the verse. Then Quincy, as always, lay at his feet and began purring. Her soft rhythmic sound helped him focus, and the lyrics came naturally. "She knows when I need to calm down," he later said. "Her purring is my best friend." Azure, the youngest cat, was responsible for unexpected twists. She loved jumping on Freddie, wrapping around his neck like a living necklace. Her energy and playfulness often interrupted his work, but these interruptions became sources of new ideas. Once, while working on Don't Stop Me Now, Azure jumped onto his shoulder and began playing with his hair. Her movements inspired him to write the line, "I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky." "She showed me how to feel freedom," he said. "She's my inspiration." But the most amazing thing was that the cats didn't just inspire Freddie. They helped him find balance between work and rest. When he got too absorbed, they gently reminded him to take a break. Murda, for instance, often jumped onto the keyboard, preventing him from playing or lay on sheets of lyrics, forcing him to stop working and play with her. "She knows when I'm overworked," Freddie said, "and she always knows how to bring me back to life." His circle gradually got used to this strange dynamic. When Freddie came to rehearsals, he often began with the question, "What does Murda think of this chorus?" Brian May and Roger Taylor teased him, but deep down, they respected his method. They knew Freddie had his own paths to inspiration, and if cats helped him, why not? Once, during the recording of the Game album, guitarist Brian May caught Freddie in the studio surrounded by cats. "You're serious?" Brian asked, watching Freddie record sounds Murda was making. "You're going to use this in a song?" Freddie smiled. "Of course," he replied. "It's genius. Listen to how she meows. That's the perfect rhythm for the chorus." Thus began the era when cats became an inseparable part of Queen's creativity. Though most people considered it a joke, those who knew Freddie understood. For him, it was serious. The cats were his inspiration, his support, his music. And perhaps it was thanks to them that Queen created the songs that still resonate in the hearts of millions worldwide. When Freddie Mercury first told Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon that his cats helped him write lyrics, the reaction was predictable: laughter. "You're joking, right?" Brian asked, smiling at Freddie, but Freddie wasn't laughing. He seriously explained how Murda suggested the chorus of Killer Queen and how opera helped with the rhythm of Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Colleagues exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe him. Mary Austin, Freddie's close friend and then fiancée, was the first to react. She knew how seriously he took his cats and wasn't surprised when he began explaining how they participated in his creative process. "You always talk to them as if they were people, she later recalled. For him, they weren't just animals, they were his family. But even she didn't expect cats to become such an important part of his work. The first time the other Queen members saw Freddie working with cats was during the recording of the game. Freddie arrived at the studio with Murda in his arms, placed her on the piano, and began playing. The other musicians watched as he periodically stopped to look at the cat, as if awaiting her approval. I thought he was joking, Roger Taylor later recalled. But then I saw him recording the sounds she made and realized he was serious. Brian May, the most analytical of the group, tried to understand how it worked. I asked him, "Freddie, do you really think a cat can help you write a hit?" He looked at me as if I'd asked a stupid question and said, "She already helped. Listen to how she meows. That's the perfect rhythm for the chorus." And he was right. The sound was really interesting. John Deacon, the quietest of the group, initially didn't take it seriously. But once, when he visited Freddie's home to discuss new material, he found him surrounded by cats. Freddie sat at the piano while Murda lay on the keys, occasionally touching them with her paw. I saw him recording these notes and adding them to the composition, John later said. And a few days later, this melody became the basis for another One Bites the Dust. I couldn't believe a cat helped create such a hit. Over time, Queen members got used to Freddie's strange method. They began noticing that when he worked with cats, his creativity became freer, more experimental. He stopped fearing mistakes, Brian said, because cats don't judge. They just do what they do, and he learned to accept it as part of the process. But not everyone in Queen's circle reacted positively. Producers and the label occasionally expressed dissatisfaction. They said it was unprofessional, Roger recalled. That you can't build a career on cat meows. But Freddie didn't listen. He knew it worked for him. Once, during the recording of Hot Space, a producer tried to restrict the cat's access to the studio. He said they were interfering with work, Freddie later recalled. But I told him I couldn't write without them. And if necessary, I'd work from home. In the end, the producer gave in, and the cats returned to the studio. The biggest test for the group came during the recording of Innuendo. Freddie was already feeling unwell, but continued working. One day during a session, he suddenly stopped and looked at Murda sitting beside him. "She says the chorus needs to be redone," he said. "She doesn't approve." The other musicians exchanged glances, but no one dared to object. They knew it was important to Freddie. Over time, Queen members began joking about his method. Brian once suggested adding to the credits lyrics written by Freddie Mercury and his cats. Roger started imitating Murda, mewing into the microphone during recordings. Even John, the most serious of the group, once said, "Maybe we should get a cat in the studio. Who knows, maybe she'll suggest a new hit." But behind the jokes lay respect. They saw how cats helped Freddie find balance between work and rest, how they inspired new ideas, how they supported him in difficult moments. He was a genius, Brian said, but geniuses sometimes lose touch with reality, and cats kept him grounded. When Freddie died, his cats remained in the Kensington house. Murda, Opera, Spectra, Rocky, Bismuth, Quincy, and Azure continued living there, cared for by his close ones. Queen members often visited them, remembering how they helped create music that still inspires millions. "Sometimes I sit in the studio and think," Brian said, "that maybe it was the cats who knew what he was doing. Maybe they felt his music was more than just sounds." Today, decades after Freddie's death, his method continues to amaze and inspire. Many musicians joke they'd like to have such a cat muse. But those who knew him understand it wasn't about the cats. It was about how he found inspiration in the most unexpected places, in the simplest things. And perhaps that's why his music remains alive to this day. Freddie Mercury's cats never went on stage with Queen, but their influence on the band's performances was undeniable. For Freddie, they weren't just studio inspiration. They helped him connect with the audience, adding that spark that made his performances unforgettable. Many fans noticed that during concerts, Freddie often looked into the crowd as if searching for someone special. Later, it turned out he was remembering his cats, imagining them among the audience. One of the most striking examples was Queen's legendary performance at Live Aid in 1985. Just before the concert began, Freddie, usually calm and confident, looked tense. He stood backstage, looking at the crowd of 72,000 people, and as Brian May later recalled, seemed to lose confidence. Then someone from the team remembered Freddie always carried a photo of Murda in his pocket. "I gave him that photo," the band's manager later recalled. He looked at it, smiled, and said, "She want me to shine today," and he went on stage. That performance became one of the greatest in rock history. Freddie seemed to float above the stage, his voice sounding with incredible power, his charisma capturing the entire hall. After the concert, Brian asked what inspired such a powerful performance. Freddie smiled and replied, "Murda. She wouldn't have approved if I sang worse than I could." But cats influenced Queen's performances not only through Freddie's memories. Sometimes their presence was felt right on stage. During the Game tour in 1980, Freddie began including strange pauses in his performances, as if listening to something. Once, during Don't Stop Me Now, he suddenly fell silent, raised his hand as if signaling the band to stop, and froze. The hall quieted in anticipation. Then, Freddie smiled and said, "Murda just told me I'm singing too loudly. Let's make it even louder." The audience erupted in applause, and Freddie continued singing with even more energy. These moments became part of his legend. Fans began noticing that when Freddie made such pauses, he often looked at a specific part of the hall, as if awaiting approval. Later it turned out he was imagining his cats sitting there watching him. He said if they were at the concert, they'd sit in the front row, a Queen technician later recalled. And he always sang for them, even if they weren't there. But the most amazing thing happened during the Hot Space Tour in 1982. Freddie decided his cats deserved their own concert. He arranged a mini-show at home, inviting friends and band members. In the living room stood a piano, and around it, like on a real stage, sat the 7 cats. Freddie sat at the instrument and began playing Crazy Little Thing Called Love, occasionally stopping to look at Murda, as if awaiting her reaction. "It was one of the strangest, yet most touching moments I've ever seen," Brian May later recalled. He sang for the cats as if they were his most important audience. This episode became so well known in Queen's circle that once, during the recording of the Works album, Brian suggested adding cat-like mewing sounds to I Want to Break Free. Freddie first laughed, Roger Taylor recalled, but then he thought and said, "Why not? Murda deserves a place in this song." In the final album version, if you listen closely, you can hear a barely noticeable sound resembling cat meows hidden in the instrumental. Cats also inspired Freddie's most memorable stage tricks. For example, his famous jump from the piano during Killer Queen emerged after he watched Murda effortlessly jump from a high shelf. He said he wanted to move as gracefully as she did, Mary Austin recalled. And he learned. But perhaps the most touching moment was Queen's performance in Monte Carlo in 1986. It was one of Freddie's last concerts, and he felt unwell. Before going on stage, he asked for Murda's photo. He looked at it for a long time, a technician later recalled. Then he said, "She'd want me to sing for her today." When he went on stage, his voice sounded weaker than usual, but his energy was incredible. He sang "Love of My Life" as if every word was addressed to someone special. After the concert, Brian asked how he managed to sing so well despite his fatigue. Freddie smiled and replied, "Murda was with me. She's always with me." Today, decades after Freddie's death, his connection with cats continues to amaze and inspire. Many Queen fans joke that perhaps it was the cats who knew his music would be immortal, and those who knew him closely are sure, without them, Queen would never have created the songs that still resonate in millions of hearts. Freddie Mercury's cats never went on stage, but their spirit was there, in every chord, every word, every glance he cast into the hall. And perhaps that's why his music remains alive, because it contained a piece of those who knew how to see the world through the lens of simple yet amazing moments. When Freddie Mercury passed away in 1991, his cats remained in the Kensington house, silent witnesses to an era that forever changed the music world. For many, they were just animals, but for those who knew Freddie, these cats were part of his legacy. They continued living in the same house, surrounded by memories of his laughter, piano melodies, and whispered conversations with them. But their story didn't end with Freddie's departure. It became even more remarkable. After Freddie's death, Mary Austin, his close friend and one of the few people he fully trusted, took care of the cats. She knew how important they were to him and promised they would live in the same comfort they were used to. The Kensington house remained their refuge, and Mary ensured nothing changed. The cats continued sleeping on the same cushions, eating from the same bowls, walking through the same rooms where Freddie once wrote his songs. But the most unexpected thing was how the cats influenced those who visited the house after Freddie. Musicians, friends, fans, all who came noticed the cats behaved differently from ordinary pets. They seemed to know their owner was gone but continued, maintaining a connection with his spirit. Mary often said that at night, when the house grew quiet, Myrta would sit on the piano and look toward where Freddie usually sat. Sometimes she began softly mewing, as if trying to reach him. Once, several months after Freddie's death, Brian May visited the house. He came to collect some recordings for a future Queen album. When he entered the studio, Myrta approached him and lay beside the piano. Brian sat down and began playing Love of My Life, a song Freddie often played for his cats. Midway through the melody, Myrta stood up and walked across the keys, as she used to do when Freddie worked. Brian froze, then recorded these notes. Later, they were added to a special edition of the Made in Heaven album, and Brian called this moment Freddie's final greeting. But Myrta wasn't the only one who continued working after Freddie's departure. Opera, the ginger cat with a loud voice, often sat by the window and meowed in time with the radio, as if trying to sing along with Queen's songs. Spectra, the snow-white cat, continued dancing in the sunbeam, as she did when Freddie watched her. Rocky ran around the room, creating the same rhythm that inspired Freddie for Another One Bites the Dust. The cats seemed to know their movements and sounds were part of something greater and continued maintaining the connection with the music they helped create. Over time, the Kensington house became a pilgrimage site for Queen fans. Many came to see the very place where legendary songs were born. But they didn't know the main keepers of this story were the cats. Mary allowed some of the most devoted fans to visit, and everyone who came told stories of amazing moments when the cats seemed to sense their connection with Freddie. Once a young girl from Japan said Myrta approached her and lay in her lap, as if knowing she had come to perform a cover of Bohemian Rhapsody. But the most touching thing was how the cats influenced Queen members. After Freddie's death, the band almost stopped performing together, but once in 1997, they decided to hold a charity concert in his honor. Before the performance, Brian, Roger, and John visited the Kensington house to say goodbye to the cats. They sat in the studio, reminiscing about old times, while the cats, as always, surrounded them. Myrta lay on the piano, Opera sat at Brian's feet, Spectra curled up beside Roger. At that moment, Brian realized they had to perform. "They seemed to give us their blessing," he later said. "We couldn't let Freddie down, and we couldn't let them down." The concert was incredible. Queen performed songs as if Freddie was with them on stage. After the performance, Brian raised the microphone and said, "This victory is for Myrta. She saved our lives today." Over time, the cats began leaving one by one. Myrta lived the longest. She died in 1998, 7 years after Freddie. She was buried in the garden of the Kensington house, near the spot where Freddie loved to sit and watch sunsets. Before her death, she sat on the piano as always, and according to Mary, her final movements resembled the very notes she played for Killer Queen. After Myrta's departure, the Kensington house grew quieter. The other cats lived a few more years, but their energy gradually faded. When the last one, Azure, the youngest, died, Mary realized the era had ended. But she didn't let the cat's story disappear. She gathered all the photos, recordings, and memories, and created the small museum in the house dedicated to Freddie and his pets. Today, this museum is open to visitors, and everyone who comes can see how cats influenced Queen's creativity. Here are photos of Myrta on the piano, recordings of her meows, even sheets of paper with her paw prints, which Freddie used as drafts for lyrics. But the most amazing thing is how people visiting the museum often say they feel the cat's presence. Some claim to hear soft purring. Others insist they see a shadow passing through the room. Mary often jokes that the cats still guard the house, and perhaps she's right. Because when you sit in Freddie's studio, surrounded by memories of his music, you can't help but feel that somewhere, in the silence, a cat is walking across the piano keys, creating a new melody. Freddie Mercury's cats were never just pets. They were part of his music, his inspiration, his life. And even after his departure, they continued writing Queen's story, quietly but confidently, as only those who know true music lives in every heartbeat, every breath, every meow can. Today, decades after Freddie's death, his connection with cats continues to amaze and inspire. Many musicians joke they'd like such a cat muse, but those who knew him understand it wasn't about the cats. It was about how he found inspiration in the most unexpected places, in the simplest things. And perhaps that's why his music remains alive to this day. When you listen to Bohemian Rhapsody, Killer Queen, or Don't Stop Me Now, listen carefully. Somewhere in the background, behind the chords and words, you'll hear a soft sound. It's the meow of those who knew music isn't just sounds. It's life. It's love. It's the cats who wrote lyrics for Queen.